My name is Rachel Doyle. I'm 32, and on Christmas night my parents locked me out of their house in the snow and wouldn't let me back in for so much as a coat. I stood on the porch with my purse on my shoulder and nothing else, and through the gap in the door my mother said the thing she'd been saying my whole life. "You can't do anything on your own, Rachel. You're desperate." Behind her, my brother Cody pulled the curtains shut in what used to be my room. The next morning, I drove to the bank to use an old card my grandfather had left me years ago, just hoping for gas money and a cheap motel. The manager swiped it, looked at her screen, and went white. "Ma'am," she whispered. "Please sit down. You need to see this." 48 hours later, my mother wasn't the one giving orders anymore. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the daughter they locked out on Christmas night with nothing but her purse turns out to be the one holding everything they never knew they had. If you've ever been called desperate by the very people who were leaning on you the hardest, stay right here. Because what that bank manager found on her screen changes everything. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I want to clear something up right away, because my mother spent years telling a different version. I was not living in my parents' house because I'd failed at life. 3 months before that Christmas, I'd taken a job as an emergency room nurse at the hospital in my hometown. I'd moved back from the city for it. The apartment I wanted wouldn't be open until February, and my first few hospital paychecks were still clearing, so I asked my parents if I could stay in my old room for a couple of months to save on a deposit. That's it. That's the whole shameful story of my dependence. A grown woman with a full-time job in the hardest department in the building, sleeping in her childhood bedroom for 8 weeks to be smart with money. I'm the kind of person who plans. I've always been the one who handles the crisis without making it about me, because that's literally my job, and it's also just who I am. I don't ask people for things. I figure it out. That sounds like strength. And most days it is. But I've learned it's also the thing that made me an easy target. Because if you never ask for help, the people around you decide you don't need any, and some of them decide that out loud, and a few of them decide it while quietly helping themselves to what's yours. I didn't know that last part yet. That Christmas. I just knew I was a 32-year-old ER nurse being treated like a burden in the house where I grew up, and I couldn't figure out why 2 months of saving money had turned me into the family disappointment. I'd understand soon. It was sitting on a screen at a bank, and it had been there for years. The temperature in that house had a pattern, and the pattern was Cody. My brother is 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was born he was the one my mother worried about, the one she watched, the one the whole house arranged itself around. There was always a reason. He'd been a premature baby. He'd had a hard time in school. He'd lost a job, then another, then a third. And every setback became more evidence that Cody needed protecting, while I, who handled my own setbacks without an audience, became evidence of something else. I became proof that some children just don't need their parents. My mother said it like a compliment and meant it like a dismissal. "Oh, Rachel's fine. Rachel can take care of herself," she'd say, waving me off like a fly, while she cleared a path through the world for my brother. Those first weeks back home, I watched it up close for the first time as an adult. Cody, 28, unemployed again, getting his car payment handled. Cody getting a check pressed into his hand at the dinner table. And me, the working nurse, getting reminded that I was lucky they were letting me stay. One night my mother said it plainly, the first small version of the line that would eventually define everything. I'd offered to help with something, money for groceries since I was eating their food, and she patted my hand and said, "Don't worry about it. You can barely take care of yourself. You can't do anything on your own anyway." I let it go. I always let it go. I was good at letting things go, which, it turns out, is exactly the quality a thief looks for in a victim. The card in my purse came from my grandfather, my mother's father, Leo Marsh. Pop Leo, I called him. He died 6 years ago, but he gave me that card 14 years before that, on the day I graduated high school. I want to tell you about that day, because it turned out to matter more than anything else in my life. He took me out for pie, just the two of us, and he slid an envelope across the diner table. Inside was a debit card with my name on it, attached to an account he'd opened for me, and he'd put a real amount in it to start. Enough to mean something. He told me it was for my future, for school, for emergencies, for the day I'd need to stand on my own 2 feet. And then he did something I didn't understand at 18. He took a paper napkin, wrote on it, folded it into a little square, and tucked it behind the card in my wallet. "Keep this with the card," he said. "Don't read it now. Read it the day you need it." Then he looked at me, dead serious, and added one thing out loud. "And Rachel, don't tell your mother about this account. She'll spend it." I laughed, because I was 18, and I thought he was being a grumpy old man about his own daughter. I tucked the napkin away and mostly forgot about it. I used the account a little in college, then less, then not at all, once I had a nurse's salary. Years went by. The card went soft and scratched in the bottom of my wallet, just an old thing I never threw away. I had no idea I was carrying a loaded weapon and a warning, folded into a square, the whole time. Pop Leo died 6 years ago, and my mother handled everything. She was his power of attorney near the end, when his health went, and after he passed, she managed the estate, the accounts, the paperwork, all of it. I was 26 and grieving and living in the city, and I was glad someone was handling it, and that someone was his daughter. So why would I question it? At the funeral, I asked her, gently, whether Pop had left anything, any little keepsake or note, because he'd been the one person who really saw me. And my mother looked me right in the eye and said, "Oh, honey, your grandfather didn't have much at the end. There wasn't really anything to leave. Don't go getting your hopes up about an inheritance." I believed her. Of course I believed her. She was my mother, standing at her own father's funeral, and the idea that she would lie to me, there then, about that, never entered my head. So I let go of the thought of any gift from Pop Leo. I had my memories and a scratched-up old debit card I assumed had long since been closed or emptied, and that was enough. I never checked the account. Why would I? I'd been told there was nothing, and I had no reason on earth to doubt the woman who told me. That single sentence at the funeral, "There wasn't really anything to leave," was the cornerstone of everything that came after. It was the lie that kept me from looking, and it worked for 6 years, because the most effective lies aren't the ones that scare you off. They're the ones that gently tell you there's nothing worth looking at, so you simply stop looking. I stopped looking. She counted on it. Living back in that house, 3 months before Christmas, I started noticing money I couldn't explain. Cody didn't work. Not steadily, but Cody had things. A newer truck appeared in the driveway. His old debts, the ones my mother used to whisper about, seemed to evaporate. There was a vacation, a deposit on an apartment for him and his fiancée, a watch. I'm not nosy by nature, but I'm an ER nurse, and the job trains you to notice when the story doesn't match the chart. The story was that my parents were comfortable but careful, retirees on a fixed income. The chart was a 28-year-old with no job buying a truck. One evening, I asked, lightly, just curious, "Where's Cody getting the money for all this?" My mother's face did something I'd see again later, a quick flicker before the smooth mask came back. "That's family business, Rachel," she said. "It's being handled." It's being handled. I let it go, because that's what I do, but it lodged somewhere in the back of my mind, a small wrong note. I even thought once, idly, that I should look at my own old account from Pop Leo someday, just to close it out properly. But I had no way to check my parents' finances, no access to my mother's accounts, nothing to investigate. The wrongness was just a feeling, and feelings aren't evidence, and I had a demanding job and an exit plan, and no real reason to start a war over a flicker on my mother's face. So I filed it away with everything else I'd let go. The truck, the watch, the flicker. I'd connect them all eventually, sitting in a chair at a bank, watching a stranger turn pale. But not yet. In early December, my mother announced the plan that would put me on a porch in the snow. Cody and his fiancée, Brielle, were going to move in. They needed a place while they got on their feet, which in Cody's case was a permanent address, and the place they needed was my room. The room I was paying nothing for, technically, but the room I'd been promised through February. My mother delivered it like good news. "It just makes more sense, Rachel. You're so independent, you'll land on your feet anywhere. Cody and Brielle really need the stability." There it was again. My competence weaponized against me. Cody's helplessness earned him a home. My capability earned me an eviction. I tried to be reasonable. I explained the apartment wasn't ready until February, that I just needed the 8 weeks, that I'd be out the second I could. My mother's face hardened in a way I didn't fully clock at the time. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Looking back, I understand why she was so eager to get me out of the house, and it had nothing to do with Cody needing a room. I was getting too close. I was in the house, noticing the trucks and the watches and the money that didn't add up, asking light little questions that were getting less light. A daughter who never visits can't notice anything. A daughter sleeping down the hall might. She needed me gone before I started actually looking, and Christmas gave her the excuse. I didn't know that yet. I just thought my mother was choosing my brother over me one more time, which was true. But it was so much smaller than the truth. The truth needed a bank to tell it. Christmas dinner was a performance, and I was cast as the cautionary tale. The table was full, aunts and uncles and cousins, and my mother spent the meal narrating Cody's bright future, the engagement, the apartment, the fresh start. When the conversation drifted to me, it drifted down, the way it always did. "Rachel's still finding herself," my mother told the table, "though I had a job and a plan and a pension. We're letting her stay with us while she sorts things out." Letting her stay? Sorts things out. I sat there in my scrubs-adjacent good sweater and ate my dinner and said nothing, because making a scene at Christmas would only prove her point. After dessert, my father disappeared into the den, which is what my father does when something hard is about to happen, and my mother followed me into the kitchen. "We think it's best if you go tonight," she said. Just like that. Tonight. Christmas night. I asked if she was serious. If I could at least stay until morning, pack my things properly. "Cody and Brielle are coming in the morning," she said. "And honestly, Rachel, the longer you drag this out, the harder you make it. You can't keep leaning on us. You need to learn to do things on your own." I went to get my bags, and she stopped me. Said they'd send my things along later, that I should just go, that I was making it a production. So I left with my purse and my coat in my hand, and nothing else. My mother stood in the doorway with the warm light behind her and said it, the whole sentence, the one I'll hear in my head forever. "You can't do anything on your own, Rachel, you're desperate." Then she shut the door, and I heard the lock turn. I sat in my car in their driveway for a while, engine running for the heat, snow filling in the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. But I'm an ER nurse, and the job has taught me one genuinely useful thing. When everything goes wrong at once, you don't get to fall apart. You triage. So I triaged. I had maybe $60 cash, a quarter tank of gas, and a credit card near its limit from moving expenses. I needed a place to sleep that wasn't a parking lot. I went through my wallet under the dome light, looking for anything, and my fingers found the old card. Pop Leo's card, soft-edged, the numbers half worn off. And tucked behind it, a little folded square of paper I hadn't looked at in 14 years. I didn't open the napkin that night. I was too tired, too cold, too close to crying. But I held that card and I thought, maybe there's $20 left on it. Maybe there's enough for a motel. My mother had said Pop left nothing, and I'd believed her for 6 years. So I wasn't expecting a miracle. I was expecting bus fare. I found a cheap motel off the highway, paid cash for one night, and lay awake deciding that first thing in the morning, I'd take that old card to the bank and see if my dead grandfather could buy me one more night indoors. That decision changed my entire life. The bank was a small credit union on Main Street, the kind with one teller window and a manager's desk in the open. I got there when it opened, running on no sleep and motel coffee. I slid the old card across the counter to the teller and gave an embarrassed little laugh. "This is really old?" I said. "It might be closed. I just want to check the balance. Maybe take out whatever's on it." The teller swiped it, frowned, swiped it again. Then she said, "Let me get my manager." In a voice that made my stomach drop, because I know that voice. It's the voice nurses use in the hallway when they don't want to say the bad thing in front of the patient. The manager came over, a calm woman named Joan Pruitt, and she sat down at her desk and pulled up the account, and I watched her face change. She read something, scrolled, read more. The color went out of her cheeks. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. Then she lowered her voice the way you do when you're about to hand someone news that's going to hurt. "Ma'am," she said, "please sit down. You need to see this." I sat. My heart was doing the thing it does in a trauma bay, that slow, heavy pounding. I thought, here it comes. The account's been drained. There's nothing. My mother was right. I'm overdrawn somehow. This is the final humiliation of the worst week of my life. I braced for empty. What Joan turned the monitor to show me was not empty. It was full of activity. Years of it. And not one transaction in that long scrolling list had been made by me. Here is what was on the screen. The account my grandfather opened for me, the one my mother swore at his funeral didn't exist, the one I'd assumed was empty or closed, was still open, still in my name, and it had been used as a piggy bank for years. There was a long history of withdrawals and transfers, dozens of them, going back well before Pop Leo died and continuing for years after. Regular amounts, sometimes large ones, and the transfers had a destination, listed right there in the bank's record, going to an account belonging to Sharon Doyle. My mother, the grandfather who'd handed me a card and a warning, had also put far more into that account over the years than I ever knew, building something for me, and my mother had been quietly bleeding it out the whole time. The balance remaining was a fraction of what the deposits and interest should have grown to. I sat there in that chair and I did the thing the job trained me to do. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I asked questions. "These withdrawals," I said to Joan, keeping my voice level. "I didn't make any of these. Who authorized them?" Joan pulled up more detail, and her careful answer told me everything. For years, the access had been tied to a power of attorney, an old authorization from my grandfather's affairs. "But Ms. Doyle," she said slowly, "this account is in your name. You're the owner. And these transactions, especially the more recent ones, the ones after the date you're telling me your grandfather passed away." She stopped. She didn't have to finish. I understood. The woman who called me desperate, who couldn't take care of myself, who needed to learn to stand on my own, had been standing partly on my money for years. If you've ever been called useless by the very people who were quietly leaning on you, you know the cold feeling that went through me in that chair. Stay with me, because this turns, and it turns, legally. Comment "I see it" if you've felt this, and subscribe so you don't miss how it ends. Joan Pruitt was kind, and she was precise, and she walked me through it like a professional, which is exactly what I needed. The account was mine, she confirmed, solely mine. My grandfather had set it up that way, with me as the owner. My mother had been an authorized user or had access through her power of attorney over my grandfather's separate affairs, and somewhere along the way, that access had bled into an account that was never hers to touch. "Here's what I'd recommend," Joan said. "We can print your full statement history. You'll want to review every transaction and identify which ones you didn't authorize, and given the pattern and the dates, you may want to file a fraud claim and speak with an attorney. Some of these transactions may be recoverable." Recoverable. I held on to that word. I asked her to print everything, every page, going back as far as the system held. While the printer ran, I sat very still and let the ER nurse in me take over from the daughter. The daughter wanted to drive to my parents' house and put my fist through that locked door. The nurse made a list. Get the statements. Identify the fraud. Find a lawyer. Document everything. Stay calm, because the calm person in the crisis is the one who controls it. By the time Joan handed me a thick stack of warm paper, I wasn't a desperate woman who'd been thrown out in the snow anymore. I was a creditor building a case. Sitting in that motel room with the statement spread across the bed, I finally understood the whole machine my mother had built. It started with the lie at the funeral. There wasn't really anything to leave. That sentence wasn't grief. It was a lock on a door. As long as I believed Pop Leo had left nothing, I'd never check the account. And as long as I never checked, she could keep drawing from it. And she had the means, because near the end of his life, she'd been my grandfather's power of attorney, handling his money, his bills, his accounts. That authority was real while he was alive. But here's the thing I learned, the thing that turned my whole case from a family grievance into a legal one. A power of attorney ends the moment the person dies. The instant Pop Leo passed, any authority my mother had through that document was gone, completely, in every state, no exceptions. Every withdrawal she made after his death wasn't a gray area or a family loan, it was unauthorized. And the account she was pulling from wasn't even his. It was mine. So she'd taken money that belonged to me, using an authority that had died with her father for years, while telling me I couldn't take care of myself. The audacity of it actually steadied me. There's a clarity that comes when cruelty turns out to be that clean, that documented, that provable. I wasn't dealing with a feeling anymore, a flicker on a face, a wrong note. I was dealing with a paper trail, and a paper trail is something an ER nurse who charts everything knows exactly how to respect. I stacked the statements neatly. I circled the transactions after the date of my grandfather's death. And then I reached for my wallet, because there was one piece of evidence I still hadn't read. I took the little folded napkin out from behind the old card, the one Pop Leo had tucked there 14 years ago, and told me not to read until the day I needed it. The paper had gone soft and yellow, the folds nearly worn through, but his handwriting was still there, that careful slanted print I'd know anywhere. I want you to hold these words in your mind for the rest of this story, because my grandfather wrote them when I was 18 years old. And he knew. He knew. For when you have to stand on your own, it read, "This is yours, Rachel. Nobody else's. Don't tell your mother about it, because she'll spend it, and she'll have a good reason every time. Some people love you and steal from you in the same breath. Protect yourself. Love, Grandpa Leo." I sat on the edge of that motel bed and I read it 3 times, and the third time my hands were steady. He'd warned me on a folded napkin when I was 18. I just never believed my own mother was the warning. He'd known his own daughter well enough to predict, 14 years in advance, exactly what she would do, and he'd tried to build a wall around me with a debit card and a paper napkin and a secret. The only thing he'd gotten wrong was thinking I'd read the note in time. I hadn't. I'd trusted her instead, the way children do, right up until she locked me out in the snow. But here's what mattered. The note wasn't just heartbreak. It was evidence of intent. It proved the account was meant for me alone, that my grandfather had explicitly excluded my mother, that there was nothing accidental or family about the money she'd been taking. Pop Leo, 6 years dead, had reached out of the ground and handed me the cornerstone of my case. I folded the napkin back up gently, and I put it somewhere safe. I was going to need it. And I was finally, fully done being told what I couldn't do on my own. I need to be clear about what this was and what it wasn't, because it matters to me that you understand I didn't win a lottery. This was not a windfall. Nobody handed me a fortune at the dramatic moment. What that bank screen showed me was a robbery, mine, in progress for years, and everything that happened next was me clawing back what was already legally mine. The money in that account was money my grandfather had given me, on purpose, with my name on it. It was never my mother's, so I wasn't getting rich. I was recovering stolen property, the way you'd recover a car somebody took out of your driveway. That distinction kept me honest through the whole thing. I never once wanted more than what was mine. I didn't want my parents' retirement savings, didn't want Cody's truck, didn't want a cent that wasn't already supposed to be in that account. I just wanted back what had been taken, and I wanted the people who'd taken it to stop pretending I was the helpless one. And to get it, I couldn't just confront my mother in a screaming match, because she'd talk her way out of that the way she'd talked her way through my entire childhood. I needed it, the way I'd needed Pop Leo's note, in writing. Provable. Cold and clear and outside the reach of her excuses. So I made a plan that night. An ER triage plan for my own family. Statements? Already done. A lawyer, next. A formal fraud claim with the credit union, alongside it. And then, only then, when the truth was documented and undeniable, the conversation. Not a screaming match. A presentation. I wasn't going to fight my mother on her turf, with feelings and volume, where she always won. I was going to bring her somewhere she'd never beaten me, the realm of the written down. I found a lawyer named Tom Avery, an estate and elder law attorney 2 towns over, and I brought him the statements and the napkin and the dates. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is how you know someone's actually thinking. When I finished, he set down his pen. "Ms. Doyle," he said, "I want to make sure you understand how strong this is, because people in your position often think they have less than they do." He laid it out. The account was mine, solely, demonstrably. My grandfather's power of attorney, whatever it had once allowed, had terminated the instant he died, automatically, by law. Every transfer my mother made out of my account after that date was unauthorized. Full stop. "This isn't a misunderstanding between family members," Tom said. "This is conversion, possibly criminal. At minimum, you have strong grounds to demand the funds back, and the credit union's own fraud process may reverse some of it directly." He tapped the napkin, in its little plastic sleeve now. "And this is unusually helpful. It establishes your grandfather's intent and explicitly excludes your mother. Juries and judges like intent. So do banks." For the first time since the porch, I felt the ground go solid under me. I asked him the question I needed answered before I did anything. "I don't want to destroy my family if I don't have to," I said. "I want my money back. Can we do this in a way that gives them the chance to make it right before it becomes a criminal case?" Tom nodded slowly. "We can lead with a demand and a recovery plan," he said. "Whether it stays civil depends entirely on how they respond." Good, I thought. I'll give them the chance. More of a chance than they gave me on a porch in the snow, but the choice would be theirs, in writing, on the record. The credit union doesn't sit on a fraud claim. Within days, their fraud department reached out to verify activity, and the moment my mother got a call from the bank instead of a call from me, the temperature changed again. Only this time it was her turning cold and then hot. The first text was ice. "I don't know what you've started, but you need to stop it immediately." I didn't answer. The next one, a day later, had a crack in it. "Rachel, the bank called me. Whatever you think you saw, it is not what it looks like. We need to talk before you do something you'll regret." Still I didn't answer, because I'd learned, finally, that answering my mother was how she got her hooks in. Every conversation was a door she could walk through. The statements couldn't be argued with. My silence couldn't be twisted. So I let the paper do the talking and I kept my mouth shut. And it drove her to a fury I'd never seen, because for the first time in my life, she couldn't manage me. She couldn't flatter me into smallness or shame me into silence, because I wasn't on the phone to be flattered or shamed. By the end of that week, the texts were coming in clusters, swinging between threats and tears, and every single one confirmed what the screen had already told me. An innocent woman doesn't panic like that. An innocent woman says, "Check whatever you want. It's all fine." My mother said, "Stop. And don't. And you'll regret this. And it's not what it looks like." Those are not the words of someone who's been wronged. They're the words of someone who's been caught. I screenshot every one of them and sent them to Tom Avery, and I went back to work in the ER, where at least the bleeding was honest. Cody found me at the hospital, in the parking lot after a shift, which took some effort, and told me my mother had sent him. He was a mess, angry and scared and trying to be intimidating, which has never been Cody's strong suit. "What are you doing to Mom?" he said. "She's freaking out. You're trying to send her to jail over money?" I leaned against my car, still in my scrubs, too tired for theater. "Cody," I said, "do you know where the money for your truck came from? Your apartment deposit? The debts that disappeared?" He opened his mouth and closed it, and in that pause I saw that some part of him knew, or had chosen not to know, which is its own kind of knowing. "Mom said it was family money," he finally said, weaker now. "She said it was an account that was, like, all of ours. Family money." There it was, the phrase she'd used to launder it in her own mind and in his. "It was an account our grandfather put in my name, Cody," I said. Just mine. He left me a note telling me to keep it away from her because she'd spend it. And she spent it. On you. I watched that land. Cody isn't cruel. Not really. He's just been the favorite so long he never asked what the favoritism cost or who paid for it. I didn't know, he said. And I think it was even true. I didn't ask. No, I said. You didn't. That's the whole problem with being the one they protect. You never have to ask where it comes from. He didn't have an answer for that. He stood in the cold parking lot looking younger than 28, and for the first time I felt something other than envy toward my brother. I felt sorry for him. He'd been bought with my money and never even knew the price. When threats didn't work and Cody didn't work, my mother reached for the oldest tool in her kit. Guilt. She called, and for once I picked up, because Tom had advised me that a documented attempt to resolve things would only help me, so I let it record in my memory and said almost nothing. Her voice was soft now, wounded, maternal. Rachel, sweetheart, I think this has all gotten so out of hand. She sniffled. Are you really going to send your own mother to prison? Over money your grandfather basically meant for the whole family anyway, after everything your father and I have done for you? I let the silence stretch, the way Joan had let her own silence stretch at the bank. Then I said, evenly, Grandpa didn't mean it for the family, Mom. He put it in my name and he left me a note about you specifically. A sharp little intake of breath. She hadn't known about the note. I don't want you in prison, I went on, which was true. I want my money back. Every dollar you took after he died, which is all of it that mattered. You have a chance to make this right before it goes any further. That's more of a chance than you gave me. She switched instantly from tears to ice, the mask slipping clean off. After everything, you're choosing money over your family, she said. And I almost laughed, because there it was, the projection so perfect it was almost art. No, Mom, I said. You did that. 6 years ago. I'm just the one who finally noticed. And I hung up, gently, while she was still talking, and I sat with my own steady heartbeat. And I realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. You stop being afraid of someone the day you can see the whole trick. While my mother swung between threats and tears, the boring, beautiful machinery of the law just kept turning. The credit union completed its review and determined that a portion of the transactions qualified for reversal under their fraud policy, the cleanest cases, the unauthorized transfers with the clearest documentation. That money started moving back toward my account. Not as a gift, not as a windfall, but as a correction. A wrong being made less wrong by people whose job is to make ledgers honest. Tom Avery drafted a formal demand letter laying out the rest, the full accounting, the dates after my grandfather's death, the legal reality that a power of attorney dies with the principal, the note, and a number, the total my mother owed me, calculated to the dollar. He sent it certified mail, the kind you have to sign for, so there could never be a question of whether she received it. I want you to notice how unglamorous this all was. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation in those weeks. Just statements and letters and a fraud analyst named Dave who called me twice to confirm details. That's how you actually win against someone like my mother. Not with a better speech. She'll always have a better speech. You win by moving the fight to a place where speeches don't count, where the only thing that matters is what's documented and what the law says, and on that ground, for the first time in my life, I was holding every card. My mother was used to winning the argument. She had no idea how to win the paperwork. And as the demand letter sat in her mailbox waiting for her signature, she did the thing people like her always do when they're cornered. She called everyone to the table. A family dinner, she announced, to settle this, as a family. My father called me the night before that dinner, and it's the closest any of them came to grace. He's a quiet man, my dad, conflict-shy to the point of cowardice, and he'd spent the whole crisis exactly where he spends every crisis, in the den with the door closed. But that night he called, and his voice was rough. Rachel, he said. I knew. Just that, at first. Then it came out of him in pieces. He'd known your mother was taking from the account. He'd told himself it was borrowing, that she'd pay it back, that it wasn't his business to police his wife. He'd watched her tell me at the funeral that there was nothing, and he'd said nothing, because saying something would have meant a fight. and my father would rather lose a daughter than have a fight. "I should have told you years ago," he said. And he was crying now, the awful held-back crying of a man who never learned how. "I let it happen. I let her put you out in the snow. I'm so ashamed." And I believed him. And it hurt more than my mother's threats, because his was the cowardice of a man who loved me and still wouldn't move. "Dad," I said gently, "thank you for telling me. I mean that." Then I said the hard part. "But I'm not stopping. The money's mine, and I'm getting it back, and I'm not going to pretend at that dinner tomorrow that this didn't happen." He was quiet a long moment. "I know," he said. "I just wanted you to hear once that you were right. You were always the strong one. We used that against you. I used it against you. It wasn't enough, but it was true. And it was the first true thing anyone in that house had said to me in years, and I held on to it." The family dinner was set for the first Sunday of the new year at my parents' house, and my mother stacked the room. Aunts, uncles, a couple of cousins, the same audience that had watched me get narrated down at Christmas. I understood exactly what she was doing, because it was the move she'd run my whole life. Surround me with relatives, frame me as the greedy, vengeful daughter dragging the family through the mud, and apply enough collective pressure that I'd back down just to make the discomfort stop. She wanted me outnumbered. She wanted a jury she'd already bribed with her version of the story. The old me would have walked into that room and folded, because the old me couldn't stand being the problem in front of people. But I wasn't bringing the old me. I was bringing a folder. Tom had prepared a clean packet for me, copies of the key statements, the timeline, the legal summary, and a copy of Pop Leo's note. I put it in a plain envelope, and I drove out to the house I'd been thrown out of 2 weeks before, through the same streets, in the same car. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me. I'd spent the worst nights of the year in a motel and a hospital break room, and I'd come out the other side standing. There's nothing a room full of disapproving aunts can do to a woman who's already been locked out in the snow and survived it. I parked. I sat for a second and touched the envelope on the passenger seat, the way you touch something to make sure it's real. Then I walked up the porch steps, past the door that had been locked against me, and I let myself into my mother's ambush, carrying the one thing she had no answer for: the truth, in writing. The living room was full, and the air was already arranged against me. My mother had gotten there first, in every sense. She sat in the center of the couch like a woman holding court, my father beside her staring at his hands, Cody and Brielle off to the side, and a half circle of relatives in the good chairs holding cups of coffee and pre-loaded opinions. My mother started before I'd even sat down. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice trembling with rehearsed hurt. "I didn't want to do this so publicly, but I think Rachel needs to hear from the whole family." She turned those wet eyes on me. "Rachel has decided, over some misunderstanding about Grandpa's old accounts, to accuse me, her own mother, of stealing. She's gone to lawyers, to the bank. She's trying to have me charged with a crime." A murmur went around the room, the soft, disapproving sound of people who'd been told one side. An aunt shook her head at me. "We took her in," my mother went on, gaining steam. "We let her live here when she had nowhere to go, and this is how she repays us. I always said it. You all know I did. That girl is desperate and she can't do anything on her own, so now she's inventing a story to take money she didn't earn." There it was, the whole strategy in one breath, the eviction rewritten as charity, the theft rewritten as my fantasy, the word desperate deployed one more time to make me small. I felt the old pull, the lifelong urge to shrink, to apologize, to make the discomfort go away by disappearing. The whole room was leaning into her story. And then I felt the envelope in my hand. And I remembered that I had spent 14 years carrying my grandfather's warning without reading it. And I was done being the only person at this table who didn't get to finish a sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Can I show everyone something?" And I opened the envelope. I laid the pages on the coffee table in the middle of the room, one at a time, so everyone could see. "This is a bank statement," I said, calm as a vital signs report. "For an account my grandfather opened in my name when I was 18. Only my name." I set down the next page. "These are the withdrawals and transfers out of it. Dozens of them, over years. Every one of them goes to an account belonging to my mother. I never authorized a single one. A few of the aunts leaned in to spite themselves. Mom told me at Grandpa's funeral that he left nothing, that there was no account, nothing to inherit. She said that so I'd never look. I set down the third page, the timeline, and I put my finger on a date. This is the day Grandpa died. A power of attorney ends the moment a person dies. That's the law, in every state. Every transfer after this date came out of my account, with no authority at all. That's not a family misunderstanding. My lawyer calls it conversion. The bank calls it fraud, and they've already started reversing it. The room had gone very quiet. My mother's face was doing something I'd never seen it do. Cracking. And then I laid down the last page, the one I'd been saving, a copy of a soft yellow napkin. And this is a note my grandfather folded into my wallet when I was 18. I only read it 2 weeks ago. I read it aloud, steadily. For when you have to stand on your own. This is yours, Rachel. Nobody else's. Don't tell your mother, because she'll spend it. Some people love you and steal from you in the same breath. I looked up. He knew. 6 years before any of this, my own grandfather knew exactly what she'd do. That was when my mother came up off the couch screaming, "That money was for this family. After everything I did for you, you ungrateful, scheming, you'd humiliate me in my own home over money your grandfather would have wanted us to have." She was shaking, pointing, her composure gone completely. And the whole room was staring at her now instead of me, because a woman who's been wronged doesn't scream like that. A woman who's been caught does. I stayed in my chair. I kept my voice low. "Grandpa knew you'd say that, Mom," I said. "He wrote it on a napkin when I was 18. And the room, finally, was silent enough to hear the truth in it. For a moment nobody moved. Then my Uncle Ray, my mother's own brother, reached down and picked up the timeline and the statement, and read them slowly, the way a careful man reads. He looked at the date of my grandfather's death. He looked at the transfers that came after it. And he set the pages down and said, into the silence, not to me, but to the whole room, "She's not the one who couldn't take care of herself." It landed like a stone in still water. The word my mother had hung on me my whole life, desperate, helpless, can't do anything on her own, drifted across the room and settled, at last, on the person it actually fit. Cody made a weak sound of protest. "This is insane! Mom didn't—" But then his eyes caught one of the transfer lines. A date he recognized, the month of his truck. And his own name was nowhere on the document, but the timing told him everything, and he stopped. He just stopped. My mother looked around the room for her audience and found it gone. The aunts who'd shaken their heads at me were now looking at her, at the screaming woman standing over a coffee table full of proof, and the story she'd told had simply evaporated in the face of paper. She turned to me, grasping, and reached one last time for the weapon that had always worked. "You can't do this," she said. "You can't do anything on your own." And I stood up finally, and I looked my mother in the eye, and I gave her sentence back to her with the only correction it had ever needed. "I did all of this on my own, Mom," I said, "including catching you." My father put his face in his hands. Nobody in that room ever called me desperate again. I didn't want to stand over my mother like a victor. That's not what Pop Leo's note was for, and it's not who I wanted to be when this was over. So before I left, I told them where things stood, plainly, the way you tell a family a prognosis. "Here's what happens now," I said to the room. "The bank is reversing what it can. My lawyer sent Mom a letter with the rest of what she owes me and a plan to pay it back. If she signs it and makes it right, I'm not asking for anyone to be arrested. I don't want my mother in prison. I want what my grandfather left me, which was always mine." I looked at her. "But I'm not dropping the claim so this can be buried. It happened. It's written down now. And it doesn't get erased to keep the peace." I picked up my pages, all but the copies, and slid them back in the envelope. "I'm not going to be in this family's life the way I was. I won't be the strong one you lean on while you call me the weak one. That's over." I said it without heat, which somehow made it land harder. "If any of you want a real relationship with me, the door's open. But it's my door now, and it locks from my side too." Then I walked out. I was the first one to leave, which I'd never been in my life. Always the last. always cleaning up, always making sure everyone else was settled before I moved. I walked down the porch steps past the door that had been locked against me on Christmas, and I got in my car, and I drove to the motel that had become more of a home than that house ever was. I didn't cry. I felt, for the first time in years, completely my own. Here's how it settled, over the months that followed. The credit union reversed the transactions that qualified, and a good portion of my money came back that way. Quietly, line by line, a ledger being made honest. For the rest, my mother faced a simple choice that her lawyer surely explained to her in plainer terms than I ever could. Sign the repayment agreement and avoid criminal exposure, or fight it and risk a fraud charge with a paper trail a first-year prosecutor could win. She signed. Of course she signed. People who count on never getting caught fold fast once they are. The repayment plan isn't fast and it isn't comfortable for her, and I've made my peace with the fact that some of it I may never fully see. But most of what was mine came home, and more importantly, it came home labeled correctly. Recovered. Not given. Not borrowed. Recovered. I moved into my apartment in February, the one I'd been saving for the whole time, and I furnished it slowly with my own paychecks, and there is a particular peace in a home that nobody can lock you out of. My job at the hospital is hard and good. I'm steady there. Cody and I are in a strange new place. He called me a few weeks after the dinner, not to argue, just to say he'd been thinking, and that he was sorry he never asked where things came from. He started pulling back from our mother's orbit, getting his own footing, and I think some part of him is relieved to find out he might be capable of standing on his own too. We'll see. My father and I talk sometimes. He came and helped me move a couch into the apartment, and we didn't say much, and that was its own kind of apology, the only kind he has. My mother and I don't speak. She has never once said she was sorry. Not really. Not in a way that wasn't actually about herself, and I've stopped waiting for it. Because a woman who could stand at her own father's funeral and lie to his granddaughter about his last gift is not a woman who's going to find the bottom of her own conscience at this late hour. I made my peace with that, and the peace is lighter than the hope ever was. I keep Pop Leo's napkin in a frame now, on the wall of my own kitchen, the soft yellow paper and the careful slanted print. For when you have to stand on your own. I read it some mornings with my coffee. He gave me money. Yes. And it mattered. But that was never the real gift. The real gift was that one person in my life saw exactly who I was, and exactly who my mother was, and trusted me to figure it out before it was too late. I figured it out. A little late. But I figured it out on my own. The people who keep telling you you're helpless are very often the ones counting on you, never checking the balance. They locked the door and called me desperate. The card. The screen. The napkin my grandfather folded when I was 18. If someone in your life keeps insisting you're helpless, ask yourself what they're hoping you'll never look at. Sometimes standing on your own just means finally checking the balance. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me your story in the comments, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories, where the quiet ones finally get the last word.